She won't last 2 hours in this heat, I heard my daughter say as the car drove away, leaving me dumped in the middle of the desert. I was 65 years old with a freshly operated knee, and my own flesh and blood had just sentenced me to death over $4.2 million. The Arizona sun burned my skin as I crawled through the sand. No water, no hope. But what Stephanie didn't know is that I was the daughter of survivors, and 3 weeks later, when she opened the door to the mansion she planned to inherit, it was my face she found on the other side. But before I start the story, please support me by leaving a like and subscribing right now. I also want to say hi to you. Drop your name, your city, and the word here in the comments. I want to know where you're following along from, even in the most distant places. Let me backtrack a bit and tell you how an ordinary Thursday ended, with me being thrown into the middle of the Arizona desert. I guess I should have seen it coming, but at 65, I still believe that family meant something, that blood ties are stronger than anything else. As they always say, my name is Margaret Ellen Whitmore, but everyone always called me Maggie. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, back when the city was still small, and everyone knew everyone. I married Harold Whitmore when I was 22, and we spent 41 years together building a life that I thought would be the foundation of our family forever. Harold was a mining engineer. He worked his whole life in the copper mines around Tucson and Phoenix, and when the company was sold to a multinational corporation, he received a severance package no one expected, from $1 million to $100,000. Money that came after decades of hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices that only those who lived through it know the weight of. When Harold died of lung cancer 3 years ago, probably because of all that mine dust, I was left alone with this fortune and a daughter I thought loved me. Stephanie was my only child. I raised her with all the love a mother can give. I paid for her college at Arizona State University, helped her buy her first house in Scottsdale, and funded her dream wedding to Brandon Mitchell, a real estate agent who gave me a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach from day one. Brandon had that kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. You know those people who say all the right things, make all the right gestures, but you feel like something is off? That was him. But Stephanie was in love, and I didn't want to be that mother who ruins her daughter's happiness over a gut feeling. What a terrible mistake I made. After Harold died, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Stephanie called less, visits got shorter. There was always an excuse not to show up for Christmas or Thanksgiving. I convinced myself it was normal, that she had her own life, her husband, her career as an interior designer. But then came the request for money. First, it was to invest in Brandon's business, $200,000 that they promised to pay back in 2 years. Then it was to renovate their house, another $100,000. Then to buy a new car because the old one had broken down, $50,000. And so it went, always with promises that it was the last time, always with that affectionate tone of voice Stephanie knew how to use so well. In 2 years, I had given them almost $400,000. And what did I get in return? Visits that were increasingly rare and calls that only happened when they needed something else. That was when I decided to have surgery on my knee. My right knee had been killing me for years, advanced arthritis that barely let me walk. The doctor said the recovery would be long, at least 8 weeks, without being able to get around properly, needing help with everything. Stephanie offered to take care of me. I was so happy, so relieved. I thought maybe I had been unfair to her, that maybe she was still that sweet girl I raised. She said she would move into my house temporarily, that Brandon could work from home, that they would take care of everything. What I didn't know is that they were planning much more than just taking care of me. The surgery was on March 15th. Everything went well. The doctor said I'd be walking again in a few weeks. Stephanie and Brandon took me home, got me settled in my room, and seemed so attentive. Brandon even made soup for me that first night. But by the second day, things started to get weird. Stephanie started asking questions about my will. Casual questions, as if it were just curiosity. She wanted to know if I had updated my documents after Harold died, if I had thought about simplifying things to make it easier when the time came. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought it was genuine concern. But then she started bringing papers for me to sign. Power of attorney documents, she said, just so she could pay my bills while I recovered. It was temporary, she assured me. I signed them. I trusted her. She was my daughter. A week later, my accountant called asking if I had authorized a transfer of $500,000 from my savings account. I froze. I said no, that it must be a mistake. He was silent for a moment and then said he would check, but that the transfer had been made using the power of attorney I had signed. When I confronted Stephanie, she cried. She said it was a misunderstanding, that Brandon had done it without her knowing, that she would return it all. I wanted to believe her. God knows how much I wanted to. But that night, I heard them talking in the kitchen. My room was at the end of the hall, and they must have thought I was asleep because of the payments. But I was wide awake and I heard every word. Brandon said the old lady was getting suspicious, and they needed to speed things up. Stephanie agreed but said they couldn't be obvious. They needed to make me look crazy first. If I looked like I had dementia, no one would believe me when I complain. And if she doesn't cooperate? Brandon asked. There was a silence. Then, my daughter's voice, cold like I had never heard before. She said that then they would have to take more drastic measures. My heart stopped in that moment. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter, the girl I held in my arms when she was born, who I comforted when she had nightmares, who I supported in every moment of her life, was planning to destroy me. The following days were a silent nightmare. I pretended I didn't know anything, while I watched their every move. And they started to execute the plan. Brandon accidentally switched my meds. Instead of the anti-inflammatory, he gave me a double dose of sleeping pills. I spent 2 days woozy, barely able to form complete sentences. Stephanie called the doctor and said I was confused, that maybe it was the onset of dementia. They would move objects out of place and then accuse me of forgetting where I put things. They hid my glasses and said I had probably thrown them away. They unplugged the landline and said I had done it myself and forgotten. It was psychological torture. Gaslighting, as they call it nowadays. And it worked. For a few moments, even I started to doubt my own sanity. But I am the daughter of a woman who survived the Great Depression and a man who fought in World War II. A Whitmore doesn't give up easily. So, I started documenting everything in secret. I hid a small notebook under the mattress and wrote down every incident, every manipulation, every lie. It was on the 12th day after surgery that everything reached the breaking point. I had managed to call my lawyer using an old cell phone I found in a drawer. I told him what was happening, asked him to cancel the power of attorney, and protect my assets. He said he would resolve everything on Monday. But somehow, Stephanie found out. That night at 3 a.m., they came into my room. Brandon grabbed me by the arms while Stephanie grabbed my legs. I tried to scream, but he put his hand over my mouth. They carried me to the garage, threw me into the back seat of their black SUV, and drove for hours in the darkness. When the car finally stopped, the sun was starting to rise. They opened the door and dragged me out. I looked around and saw only desert. Sand, cacti, rocks. No road in sight, no house, no sign of civilization. Stephanie leaned down and looked into my eyes. She said I should have cooperated, that now it was too late. Then she stood up, got into the car with Brandon, and they drove away. The sound of the engine grew more and more distant until it disappeared completely. I was alone in the Arizona desert, without water, without food, without a cell phone, with a knee operated on less than 2 weeks ago. I was going to die there. Friends, every story I tell is released every day. But YouTube will only show them to you if you hit the red subscribe button. Please, do it right now while I'm speaking. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and you'll never miss a story. Did you do it? Thank you. The Arizona desert sun is merciless. By 7 a.m. it was already about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 Celsius, and I knew that by noon the temperature would pass 113 degrees 45 Celsius. People die in the desert all the time. Disoriented tourists, immigrants trying to cross the border, people who underestimate the power of the heat. And there I was, a 65-year-old woman with a fresh knee surgery, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. My first reaction was panic. Pure and absolute panic. I cried, screamed, begged a God who seemed to have abandoned me along with my daughter. But after about 20 minutes, I realized that crying would only dehydrate me faster. I needed to think. I needed to act. Harold always said that the difference between surviving and dying in an extreme situation is the ability to keep calm and think clearly. He learned that in the mines, where accidents happened and only those who kept a cool head survived. I looked around, trying to identify anything that could help me. The terrain was typical of the Sonoran desert, sandy and rocky ground. Giant saguaros pointing to the sky, scattered bushes, some chala cacti with their treacherous spines. In the distance I could see a mountain range, but I had no idea which direction to go. My knee throbbed with pain. The bandage had come loose during the car ride, and I could see the incision was red and swollen. Infection, I thought. If the heat didn't kill me, the infection would. But I refused to die there. I refused to give that satisfaction to Stephanie and Brandon. I started to walk, slowly, limping, using a dead cactus branch as a makeshift cane. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew staying still was certain death. At least moving gave me a chance, however small. The sun climbed and the temperature rose by the minute. I tried to stay in the shadow of the larger saguaros whenever possible, resting a few minutes before continuing. My mouth was dry as sandpaper, and my skin was starting to burn even with the long-sleeved blouse I was wearing. I lost track of time. It could have been an hour, or for hours. I didn't know anymore. I just knew I needed to keep going, one step at a time, ignoring the pain in my knee. ignoring the thirst, ignoring the voice in my head telling me to give up. That was when I saw the road. At first, I thought it was a mirage. The desert does that to you, creates images of things that don't exist, tricks you with promises of salvation. But the closer I got, the more real the road looked. A strip of asphalt cutting through the desert, old and cracked, but definitely real. I dragged myself to the side of the road and collapsed on the ground. I didn't have the strength to stand up, much less signal a car. I could only lie there, praying someone would show up before I lost consciousness. I don't know how much time passed. I remember closing my eyes and thinking of Harold, of how furious he would be if he could see what our daughter had done. I remember thinking of all the things I wanted to have said to him before he died, all the things left unsaid between us. I remember thinking that at least, if I died there, I would die free, and not at the hands of those monsters. The sound of an engine woke me up. I opened my eyes and saw an old pickup truck stopping on the side of the road. It was a sun-faded red Ford F-150. One of those that looks like it's run 1,000,000 miles and still runs, because the owner takes care of it with love. A man jumped out of the vehicle and ran toward me. He must have been about 55, tan skin from working outdoors, gray hair under a Diamondbacks baseball cap. He wore worn-out jeans and a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He exclaimed something about Jesus Christ and asked what had happened to me. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. He understood immediately, ran back to the pickup and returned with a bottle of water. He helped me sit up and brought the bottle to my lips. He told me to drink slowly, that if I drank too fast, I'd get sick. The water was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted in my life. I drank in small sips, feeling the liquid wet my parched throat, bringing me back to life little by little. I managed to whisper that my family had left me there to die. The man who I later found out was named Raymond Hollister looked at me with an expression of mixed shock and anger. He was the kind of person you find in rural Arizona. Simple folks who still believe in things like honor, loyalty, and real family. He asked what kind of people do something like that. What kind of monster abandons an old lady in the desert? It wasn't a question for me. It was more for himself, trying to process that evil. Raymond carried me to the pickup, literally carried me, because my knee couldn't take any more weight, and put me in the passenger seat. He turned the AC on max and started driving while I explained, with a weak voice, what had happened. I told him everything. About Harold, about the inheritance, about Stephanie and Brandon, about the months of manipulation, about the night they dragged me from my own bed. I told him about the documents they made me sign, about the money they had stolen, about their plan to make me look crazy. Raymond listened in silence, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter and tighter. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. He said he had seen a lot of bad things in life, served to tours in Iraq, saw things he wouldn't wish on anyone. But this, he said, this was another level of evil. Her own daughter doing something like that. I repeated those words. My own daughter. And the tears finally came. Raymond took me to his house first, a modest ranch house near a small town called Gila Bend, about 80 miles southwest of Phoenix. His wife, Dolores, was a retired nurse and took care of my knee while I rested. She cleaned the wound, changed the bandage, and gave me antibiotics she had saved from an old surgery. Dolores said I needed to go to the hospital, that the infection could get serious. I knew she was right, but I explained that if I showed up at a hospital, my daughter would know I was alive, and I couldn't let that happen, not yet. Raymond and Dolores exchanged a look. They didn't completely understand what I was planning, but they respected my decision. Arizona people are like that. They respect people's autonomy, even when they think they're wrong. I spent 3 days at their house recovering. Dolores fed me homemade broths and forced me to rest. Raymond made some discreet calls, found out that Stephanie and Brandon had reported my disappearance to the police, claiming I had wandered out of the house confused and had likely gotten lost in the desert. Raymond told me with disgust in his voice that they were playing the role of the worried family. He said my son-in-law even cried in an interview for the local TV news, spoke about how I was showing signs of Alzheimer's, how they should have watched me more closely. I felt a cold rage take over me. It wasn't the hot anger of the moment anymore, the kind that makes you want to scream and break things. It was a calculated, patient rage. The rage of someone who was underestimated and is now going to show what they are capable of. I told Raymond they thought I had died, and that for now, I wanted them to keep thinking that. He nodded and asked what I needed. I said I needed information. I needed to know what they were doing, what they were planning, who was helping them. That was when Raymond introduced me to his niece, a woman named Crystal Vasquez, who worked as an administrative assistant at a law firm in Phoenix. Crystal was 35 years old, sharp as a fox, and had a personal connection to elder abuse cases. Her own grandmother had been the victim of a financial scam years before. Crystal said Aunt Dolores had told her my story, and she wanted to help. I warned her it could be dangerous. Crystal smiled, a smile that had something predatory in it. She said she had spent 5 years working for lawyers who defended people like my daughter. She knew exactly how they operated. And she knew exactly how to destroy them. In that moment, I knew I had found an ally. Crystal started investigating immediately. Using her connections in the Phoenix legal world, she discovered that Stephanie and Brandon had already hired a lawyer specializing in inheritances, a guy named Victor Ashworth who had a questionable reputation in the field. Crystal explained that Ashworth was known for solving problems for rich families. Problems like elderly relatives who refused to die or hand over the money. I asked how he solved these problems, already dreading the answer. Crystal said in various ways. Sometimes it was just paperwork declarations of mental incapacity, asset transfers, that sort of thing. But there were rumors that some of his clients had convenient accidents. My blood ran cold. I asked if she was saying he killed people. Crystal replied that people died conveniently, when they were getting in the way of his clients' plans. Nothing was ever proven, of course. Ashworth was too careful for that. So it wasn't just my daughter and son-in-law I was facing, it was a bigger operation. More organized, more dangerous than I imagined. In the following days, Crystal put the pieces of the puzzle together. She discovered that Victor Ashworth had a network of contacts. That included doctors willing to sign fake dementia reports, notary clerks who turned a blind eye to suspicious documents, and even police officers who helped cover up investigations. It was a well-oiled machine for robbing the elderly. And my daughter had allied herself with these people to destroy me. Crystal also discovered something that shocked me even more. Stephanie and Brandon were in Ashworth's first clients, who tried to get rid of a relative in the desert. 2 years earlier, a 78-year-old man named Walter Henderson had disappeared under similar circumstances. His body was never found. The family inherited his fortune without any problem. I could have been just another statistic. Just another anonymous victim of a system that protects predators and ignores the vulnerable. But I was alive, and I was going to use that to my advantage. While Crystal investigated, I started planning my return. I didn't want to simply show up and report Stephanie and Brandon. That would be too easy, too fast. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to feel the fear I felt in that desert, the sensation of being completely alone and abandoned. Raymond got some important information. He found out that the funeral, yes, my funeral was scheduled for a week from now. Without a body, of course. But Stephanie had already obtained a certificate of presumed death, claiming I had likely died of exposure in the desert and the body must have been eaten by coyotes. The coldness with which she had organized everything impressed me. My own daughter was planning my funeral while I was still breathing, already calculating how long it would take to release the inheritance. Crystal found out more details about the ceremony. It was going to be at the Scottsdale Methodist Church, the same church where Harold and I got married, where Stephanie was baptized. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She also found out that Ashworth was going to attend the funeral, disguised as an old family friend, of course. But in reality, he would be there to ensure everything went as planned, that no one asked too many questions. I decided the funeral would be the perfect moment for my resurrection. The days leading up to the ceremony were intense preparation. Crystal helped me gather documents, record testimonies, create a complete dossier on Ashworth's activities and his criminal network. Raymond took me back to Phoenix, but we stayed in a safe house and apartment that belonged to a distant cousin of Dolores, someone who had no connection to my family or Ashworth's world. I watched from afar as Stephanie and Brandon played the role of devastated daughter and son-in-law. I saw the TV interviews, the tearful appeals for information about my whereabouts before the funeral. I saw the photos they posted on social media, memories of happy moments that seemed so distant now. There was one photo in particular that hurt me. It was from Stephanie's 60th birthday party? No, wait, my 60th birthday, 2 years prior. I was hugging her, smiling, having no idea that the girl I loved so much was already planning how to get me out of the way. Crystal also discovered something about Victor Ashworth that completely changed our strategy. He wasn't just a corrupt lawyer. He was the leader of an organization operating in at least 3 states: Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. They had a well-defined method: identify wealthy elderly people with problematic families, approach those relatives, offer solutions to accelerate the inheritance. The price? A generous percentage of the inherited assets. In my case, Ashworth was going to keep 30% of everything over $1 million. I wasn't just a betrayed mother. I was a victim of organized crime. Crystal introduced me to a contact of hers at the FBI, an agent named Marcus Webb who had been investigating Ashworth for 2 years, but never managed to get enough evidence for a formal indictment. Agent Webb was a man of about 45, serious and methodical, the type who doesn't show emotion, but you know inside is boiling with indignation. When I told him my story, I saw a glint appear in his eyes. He said I was exactly what the investigation needed. A living victim willing to testify with documentary proof of the conspiracy. I asked what he needed from me. Webb explained he needed me to wear a hidden wire and confront my daughter in Ashworth. If we could get a recorded confession, we would have enough to take down the whole operation. It was risky. Extremely risky. But it was also the only way to ensure Stephanie, Brandon, and Ashworth paid for what they did not just to me, but to all the other victims who didn't have the luck to survive. I accepted. The day of the funeral arrived. It was an April morning, blue sky without a single cloud. Sun shining as if the world didn't know terrible things were happening under its light. Crystal helped me get ready. I chose a navy blue dress, Harold's favorite. He always said that dress brought out my eyes. It seemed appropriate to wear it on the day I was going to resurrect. The recorder was hidden in my bra, a tiny device Agent Webb guaranteed wouldn't be detected. I was nervous, more nervous than I had ever been in my life, but I was also determined. Raymond dropped me off 2 blocks from the church. He wanted to walk me in, but I said I needed to do this alone. This was my battle, my family, my life that had been destroyed. I needed to be the one to confront them. I walked to the church, every step a small victory over the dessert that should have killed me. My knee still hurt, but now the pain was a reminder of everything I had overcome. The church doors were open. From inside, I could hear organ music, muffled voices. My own funeral was happening, and I was about to interrupt it in the most dramatic way possible. I took a deep breath and walked in. If you want to know how the story ends and discover many others, hit the red subscribe button. It's free and helps me a lot. The inside of the church was full. Fuller than I expected. There were people I knew, neighbors, old colleagues from the book club, some of Harold's friends. But there were also a lot of people I didn't recognize, probably acquaintances of Stephanie and Brandon, people who were there more out of social obligation than any real affection for me. At the front of the church, next to an empty casket covered in white flowers, stood my daughter. Stephanie wore an elegant black dress, makeup perfect despite the tears running down her face. Brandon was beside her, an arm around her shoulders, the expression of a desolate widower. And a few steps back, discreet but present, was Victor Ashworth. I recognized him from the photos Crystal had obtained. A man of about 60, slicked back gray hair, expensive suit, snake-like smile. I started walking down the center aisle. At first, no one noticed me. People were focused on the priest, who was talking about the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing those we love. The irony of those words in that context was almost unbearable. But then someone saw me. A neighbor named Dorothy, who had lived on my street for 30 years. She looked at me, looked again, and then let out a scream that echoed through the whole church. Everyone turned around. And then I saw it. I saw the exact moment Stephanie recognized me. I saw the color drain from her face, saw her eyes widen in pure terror, saw her entire body freeze as if she had seen a ghost. Technically, she had. I kept walking. Slowly, deliberately, every step calculated to increase the impact. The silence in the church was absolute, hundreds of people holding their breath, trying to understand what was happening. I stopped about 10 feet from the empty casket and looked directly at Stephanie. I said the funeral was very beautiful, that she had really done a nice job with the details. White flowers were my favorite, she remembered. What a thoughtful daughter. Stephanie opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Brandon, beside her, looked about to faint. Ashworth was the only one who kept his composure. I saw him straighten up, calculate the situation, start to formulate a strategy. But even he couldn't completely hide the shock. I continued. I said I thought she would like to know that I didn't die in the desert. Apparently, mothers are harder to kill than she imagined. The murmuring started. People whispering, asking what was happening, why the dead woman was standing in front of the church. I saw cell phones being pulled out, people starting to film. Perfect. Stephanie finally found her voice. She said she didn't understand, that they had searched for me, that the police said I had probably died in the desert. She tried to sound relieved, happy even, but her eyes told a completely different story. I smiled. I said that was exactly what she wanted to happen, wasn't it? That's why she took me to the desert at 3 a.m., left me without water, without a cell phone, without any chance of survival. It was for me to die there, and she would inherit everything without any problem. The murmurs turned into horrified gasps. People started backing away from Stephanie and Brandon, as if their evil was contagious. Brandon tried to intervene. He said it was a lie, that I was confused, that it was probably the trauma of getting lost in the desert. He said everyone knew I had memory problems. I interrupted him. I said my memory was working perfectly. So perfectly that I remembered every word I heard that night, when they argued in the kitchen about how to make me look crazy. I remembered my daughter's voice saying she needed to take more drastic measures. I remembered the whole plan from beginning to end. I pulled an envelope from my pocket. I said I also had documents, proof of the illegal transfer of $500,000 from my account, copies of the power of attorney documents she made me sign under false pretenses, recordings of phone calls between her and her lawyer. I looked directly at Ashworth discussing how to accelerate my death. Ashworth took a step forward, trying to take control of the situation. He said I had clearly gone through a traumatic experience and needed medical help. He said no one there believed those absurd accusations. I turned to him. I said, speaking of her lawyer, I knew everything about him too. I knew about the scheme he ran, about the other families he helped rob their elderly relatives, about Walter Henderson who disappeared 2 years ago in circumstances identical to mine. Ashworth went pale. For the first time, he seemed genuinely scared. That was when the church doors opened and Agent Webb walked in, followed by a dozen federal agents. Badges shining, guns on hips, serious expressions. Webb walked directly to Ashworth. He stated his full name, Victor Thomas Ashworth, and informed him he was under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. The chaos that followed was indescribable. People screaming, pushing to get out of the church, cell phones filming from every angle. Agents handcuffing Ashworth while he shouted he wanted his lawyer, that it was all a setup. Stephanie tried to run. She sprinted toward the side door of the church, Brandon right behind her. But other agents were waiting outside. I watched as my daughter was handcuffed and put in the back of a police car, screaming she was innocent, that she had been tricked, that it was all Brandon and Ashworth's fault. Brandon said nothing. He simply hung his head as he was arrested. The man who always had all the answers finally speechless. I stood in the middle of that confusion, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes. Satisfaction at seeing justice being done. But also a deep, almost paralyzing sadness. That was my daughter being arrested. The girl I raised, who I loved unconditionally, who I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. And I was there, watching her be taken away like a criminal. Dorothy, the neighbor, approached me. She was crying. She hugged me and said she was so sorry, that she never imagined Stephanie was capable of such a thing. She said she always thought we were such a close, loving family. I thanked her, but I said nothing. What was there to say? That appearances are deceiving. That we never really know people, even those we raise. That money turns good people into monsters? All those things were true, but none of them made the pain any less. The days that followed were a whirlwind of interrogations, depositions, and legal procedures. I spent more time at the FBI office than anywhere else, repeating my story dozens of times, identifying documents, confirming information. The investigation revealed that Ashworth's network was even bigger than Crystal had discovered, besides the 3 states we already knew about. They also operated in Colorado and Texas. In total, they identified 23 suspicious cases of murder or facilitated death of elderly people in the last 7 years, 23 destroyed families, 23 people who trusted those they loved and were betrayed in the worst possible way. I was one of the few who had survived to tell the story. Agent Webb told me my testimony was crucial to the whole case. Without me, they probably never would have managed to take down Ashworth. He was too careful, too smart, had too many people in his pocket. But I was alive, and I remembered everything. Victor Ashworth's trial began 6 months after my resurrection. It was a case that attracted national attention. The elite lawyer running an elderly murder-for-hire scheme, the families hiring his services to speed up inheritances, the victims who never had a chance to tell their side. I testified for 3 days. I told about the night I was kidnapped, about the dessert, about the months of psychological manipulation. I told about my daughter, about the coldness with which she planned my death, about the words I heard that night in the kitchen. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, harder than surviving the dessert, harder than burying Harold, because every word I said was a nail in the coffin of my relationship with Stephanie. Every detail I revealed was an admission that my daughter was a monster. Ashworth was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge said his crimes represented one of the most cruel and calculated forms of violence against the vulnerable he had ever seen in his 30-year career. Stephanie was sentenced to 25 years. Her lawyer tried to argue she had been manipulated by Ashworth and Brandon, that she was a victim just as much as I was. But the recordings I had made told a different story. My daughter knew exactly what she was doing. She chose to participate. Brandon got 20 years. He took a plea deal, gave information on other members of Ashworth's network in exchange for a reduced sentence. Typical of him, always looking for the easy way out, always thinking of himself first. After the trials ended, I was left not knowing what to do with my life. The house in Phoenix was empty and full of memories. Memories of Harold, of Stephanie as a child, of a time when family meant love and not betrayal. I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore. I moved to a retirement community in Sedona, a place surrounded by the famous red rocks where the air is clean and the energy, they say, is healing. I don't know if I believe in that stuff, but I needed a fresh start. Raymond and Dolores visit me regularly. They became the family I lost not by blood, but by choice. Crystal also shows up from time to time, always with stories about her work helping other victims of financial abuse. She founded a nonprofit organization after my case. It's called Survivor's Voice, and it helps elderly people who are in situations similar to mine identify the warning signs, document evidence, and seek help before it's too late. I sit on the advisory board. Sometimes I give speeches, tell my story to groups of seniors and healthcare professionals who work with this population. Every time I speak, I hope someone in the audience recognizes the signs, takes action, saves their own life or the life of someone they love. Stephanie wrote me a letter from prison about 8 months after the conviction, 5 pages of apologies, explanations, justifications. She said she never wanted me to die, that it was just to scare me, that she was going to pick me up in the desert after a few hours. Lies, more lies. She still couldn't admit the truth, not even to herself. I didn't reply to the letter. I had nothing to say. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up thinking about her, thinking about the little girl who held my hand when she was afraid of the dark, who made me Mother's Day cards with crooked drawings and colorful hearts. Where did that girl go? At what moment did she transform into the woman who left me to die in a desert? I don't have answers. Maybe I never will. What I learned from all this is that family isn't blood. Family is the people who choose to stay by your side when everything goes wrong, who find you when you are lost, who help you get back up when you've been knocked down. Harold was my family. Raymond and Dolores are my family. Crystal is my family. The other survivors I met through the work at Survivor's Voice are my family. Stephanie was just someone I shared DNA with. And that, I found out, means nothing when the other person's heart is poisoned by greed. 3 years have passed since that day in the desert. 3 years since my own daughter left me to die. 3 years since I rose from the ashes of my old life. I am now 68 years old. My knee has finally completely recovered, ironic, considering the surgery that was supposed to heal me almost killed me. I walk every day on the trails of Sedona, watching the sun rise behind the red rocks, breathing pure air, reminding myself that I am alive. Survivor's Voice has grown a lot since its founding. Crystal secured partnerships with government agencies, hospitals, and specialized police units. Her work has already helped more than 200 seniors get out of abusive situations before it was too late. Every saved life gives me purpose. Every family that doesn't go through what I went through justifies all the suffering. Agent Webb called me last week, said the Ashworth case is still generating results. 3 more members of the network were arrested in Colorado, including a doctor who signed fake dementia reports and a notary clerk who forged documents. The web of corruption was huge. We are still discovering all the threads. Stephanie is still in prison. She stopped writing to me after I didn't answer the first letters. I heard she is working in the penitentiary library, taking rehabilitation courses, that maybe she'll be a different person when she gets out in 18 years. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I want to believe it. Brandon is also in prison, in a different facility. I heard he was beaten by other inmates when they found out what he had done. It seems even criminals have a code of honor when it comes to violence against the elderly. I didn't feel pity. I know I should, as a Christian, forgive and wish well even for my enemies. But the truth is, I'm not a saint. I'm a woman who almost died at the hands of people who were supposed to love me, and some wounds don't heal completely. What did heal was my capacity to trust. In the beginning, after everything that happened, I couldn't believe in anyone. I saw threats everywhere, ulterior motives in every gesture of kindness. But Raymond and Dolores showed me that good people still exist. Crystal showed me that it's possible to transform pain into purpose. The other survivors I met showed me that I wasn't alone, that family betrayal is more common than anyone imagines. It is estimated that more than 5 million elderly people suffer some form of financial abuse every year in the United States alone. Most cases are never reported. Most victims never seek justice, be it out of shame, fear, or simply because they don't believe anyone will believe them. I was lucky. I had Raymond to save me from the desert, Crystal to help me investigate, Agent Webb to turn my story into justice. Many victims have none of these things. That's why I tell my story. That's why I will continue telling it until the day I can't anymore. If you are listening to this and recognize anything I went through, the suspicious questions about the will, the requests for money that never end, the attempts to make you seem confused or incompetent, please seek help. Talk to someone you trust. Document everything. Don't wait until it's too late. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. And you are not alone. There are resources available. Adult protective services in every state, the National Elder Abuse Hotline, organizations like Survivor's Voice, people who will believe you, who will help you, who will fight by your side. The worst thing you can do is stay silent. That is exactly what abusers want, your silence. Your shame, your fear. Don't give that to them. I received an unexpected call last month. It was a woman named Patricia Henderson, the daughter-in-law of Walter Henderson, that man who disappeared in the desert years before me. Patricia was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. But slowly, the story became clear. Walter didn't disappear by accident. He was murdered by his own son with the help of Victor Ashworth. The FBI investigation finally found enough evidence to reopen the case, and Walter's son, Patricia's own husband, had been arrested the week prior. Patricia wanted to thank me. She said my story, my survival, was what finally gave the police the courage to look closer at Walter's case. If I hadn't survived, if I hadn't spoken up, her father-in-law's death would continue to be just another accident in the desert. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about Walter, a kind man, a Korea veteran, who had built a fortune with a chain of laundromats in Arizona, a man who trusted his only son too much, who never imagined his own flesh and blood would be capable of such cruelty. Walter's story was so similar to mine, it was scary. The same pattern of isolation, manipulation, allegations of dementia, the same planned ending in the desert, where the heat and animals did the dirty work. The only difference is that Walter didn't have a Raymond to save him. After that call, I decided to write a book. I don't know if anyone will want to publish it, but I need to put everything on paper. Not just my story, but the story of all the victims I've met over these 3 years. The book will be called Desert of Lies. It's about betrayal, greed, and the almost infinite capacity of human beings to rationalize evil when money is involved. But it's also about survival. About the good people who exist in the world, ready to help strangers in need. About the possibility of rebuilding life even after losing everything you thought mattered. Crystal is helping me with the research. She has access to dozens of similar cases, stories of seniors who were robbed, abused, sometimes killed by people who should have protected them. Every story breaks my heart all over again. But it also reminds me why this work is important. Raymond read the first chapters last week. He's not one to show emotion, but when he finished, I saw tears in his eyes. He said I should be proud. Said I transformed the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that can help thousands of people. I don't know if I'm proud. I still carry a lot of shame for having trusted the wrong person, for not seeing the signs, for having raised a daughter capable of such evil. But I am at peace. For the first time in a long time, I am at peace. The desert that should have been my grave became the place of my rebirth. The betrayal that should have destroyed me transformed me into someone stronger, wiser, more determined. Stephanie took many things from me. She took my trust in family, my faith in humanity. Years of my life I spent in trials and recovery. But she didn't take my soul. She didn't take my capacity to love, to trust again, to find purpose even in pain. And that, in the end, is the only victory that really matters. I am finishing writing this on the porch of my house in Sedona, watching the sunset paint the rocks red and orange. The air is fresh, smells of sage and juniper, and I can hear birds singing as they prepare for the night. I am 68 years old. I survived a 41-year marriage, the death of the love of my life, the betrayal of my own daughter, and a night in the desert that should have been my last. And I am still here. I still laugh, still cry, still get emotional over silly things like puppies and sunsets. I still have hope despite everything, that the world can be a better place if good people keep fighting. Survivor's Voice celebrated 3 years of existence last month. We had a small celebration here in Sedona, with all the volunteers and some of the survivors we've helped over this time. One of them, a 72-year-old lady named Gloria, hugged me and said I had saved her life. She was in a situation almost identical to my manipulative son, forged documents, plans to make her disappear. But she heard my story on a TV show, recognized the signs, and sought help before it was too late. Today Gloria lives with her sister in Florida, far from the son who tried to destroy her. She is happy, she is safe, she is alive. Because of me. Because of my story. If I had died in that desert, Gloria would probably be dead too. And all the other people we helped, all the cases we solved, all the lives we saved, none of that would have happened. Sometimes the universe has strange plans for us. Sometimes the worst thing that happens in our life is exactly what we needed to become, who we were meant to be. I don't forgive Stephanie for what she did. Maybe one day I will. Maybe never. But I am grateful for having survived. I am grateful Raymond drove down that road at that time. I am grateful Crystal entered my life. I am grateful for every person who helped me rebuild what was destroyed. Blood isn't family. Family is the people who choose to love you even when they don't have to, who stay by your side even when it's hard, who find you in the desert when everyone else has abandoned you. I found my true family at 65 after almost dying. Better late than never. For anyone going through something similar, I want you to know, there is life after betrayal. There is hope after despair. There is love after being destroyed by the people who are supposed to love you. You just need to have the courage to continue. One step at a time, even when your knee hurts, even when the sun is burning, even when it seems there is no more road ahead. The road always appears, sometimes when you least expect it. And sometimes, the person who saves you is a stranger in a Diamondback's cap, driving an old pickup truck in the middle of nowhere. Life is strange like that. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. I hope it helps you in some way, even if it's just to remember that you are not alone, that terrible things happen to good people, and that surviving is the greatest revenge. I am here. I am alive. And I will continue telling my story until the day I can't anymore. Because stories are what connect us. Stories are what save us. And sometimes, telling our truth is the bravest thing we can do. My name is Margaret Ellen Whitmore. I survived the desert, betrayal, and my own daughter. And now, I survived by telling my story to you. If you like the story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments which part impressed you the most. There's more. Tomorrow. See you there.